Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The shadow wasn't just darkness. It was a physical weight, a cold hand crushing the air from my lungs, and the first thing I heard as I woke into a new life was the sound of my own execution. Die quietly, Julian. You're ruining the silence. The voice was deep, resonant, and utterly devoid of mercy. It belonged to a man standing over me, his silhouette cut from the fabric of nightmares, backlit by the eerie, phosphorescent glow of magical artifacts lining the walls. My vision blurred, swimming in tears I hadn't shed and pain I hadn't earned. The memories hit me a split second later, fracturing my skull with the force of a hammer strike. I wasn't me. I wasn't the cynical university student reading web novels in a dorm room. I was Julian Vane, the disposable side character, the sickly, obsessive, jealous outcast of the Vane dukedom. And the man currently strangling me with his shadow magic? That was Duke Kalen Draxos, the villain, the tyrant of the North, and, tragically, my fiancée. According to the plot of the Silver Crown's Lament, this was the scene where Julian Vane died. He had broken into Kalen's private study to beg for affection, knocked over a vase containing a trapped demon soul, and Kalen, pushed to the brink by Julian's incompetence, finally snapped. But I wasn't Julian, and I refused to be a footnote in a tragedy. My survival instinct, honed by years of navigating corporate sharks in my past life, overrode the panic. I didn't claw at the invisible bands of shadow constricting my throat. That's what the old Julian would have done. Instead, I let my hands drop to the floor, palms open in surrender, and forced my eyes to lock onto the glowing crimson irises of the man killing me. I smiled. It was a broken, gasping thing, but it was a smile. Kalen's eyes narrowed. The pressure on my throat didn't loosen, but it didn't tighten, either. Curiosity. The predator had found a flaw in the prey's behavior. If you kill me, I rasped, my voice sounding like gravel grinding together. You'll never find the jagged key to the Western Armory. The shadows vanished instantly. Air rushed into my lungs with a violent heave, and I collapsed onto the cold marble floor, coughing until my chest burned. Above me, the rustle of heavy velvet and the click of boots signaled Kalen's approach. He crouched, gripping my chin with long, gloved fingers, forcing my head up. His face was a masterpiece of cruel beauty. High cheekbones, skin pale as winter moonlight, and hair like spilled ink cascading over his shoulders. The Western Armory has been lost for 3 centuries, Kalen said, his voice a low purr that vibrated through my bones. A myth. Like your intelligence, Julian. A myth to the Empire, I wheezed, wiping a streak of blood from my lip. But not to the author. The author? A figure of speech. I lied quickly, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew where the armory was because I had read the ending. I knew everything. I knew that Kalen Draxos was destined to lose the war against the Holy Prince, Alaric, because he ran out of enchanted steel. I knew he would be beheaded on the steps of the Imperial Palace in 2 years. I knew that Julian Vane was supposed to be a corpse on this floor 5 minutes ago. I pushed myself up to a sitting position, smoothing the front of my ruined silk nightshirt. I had to pivot. The old Julian was a whining sycophant. The new Julian had to be indispensable. You despise me, Kalen, I said, my voice gaining strength. It was strange hearing this melodic, posh accent coming from my mouth. You think I'm a leech attached to your title. A weakling foisted upon you by the Emperor to keep you in check. Kalen stood, towering over me. You are observant today. Usually, you are merely loud. I'm done being loud, I said, meeting his gaze with a coldness that mirrored his own. I want to live. And you want the throne. The Emperor sent me here to spy on you, to be a thorn in your side, so you couldn't focus on your rebellion. Did you never wonder why I was so intolerable? It was a mask. It was a lie, of course. The original Julian really was just intolerable. But Kalen didn't know that. Kalen studied me, his head tilting slightly. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the ozone scent of high-tier magic. He was reading my aura, searching for deception. He would find fear, yes, but he wouldn't find the obsession that usually radiated from this body. Prove it, Kalen commanded. The solstice banquet is in 3 days, I said. Prince Alaric will be there. He plans to accuse you of harboring dark artifacts. He's planted a cursed chalice in your carriage. If you arrive with it, the holy knights will have grounds to execute you on the spot." Kalen's expression didn't change, but the shadows in the corners of the room flickered violently. "And you know this how?" "Because I have eyes where you do not," I bluffed. "Check the carriage, Kalen. If the chalice is there, I live. If it's not, you can finish what you started tonight." He stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. Then, a slow, terrifying smirk curved his lips. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of my ear, sending a shiver of pure dread down my spine. "Very well, Julian. But know this. If you are lying, death will be the kindest thing I offer you." The next 3 days were a blur of panic and preparation. I was trapped in a body that felt like it was made of glass. Julian Vane was an omega in this universe's dynamic, physically weaker, prone to sickness, and magically inert. But looking in the mirror, I saw the potential the original owner had wasted. He was beautiful in a fragile, tragic way. Silver blonde hair, eyes the color of bruised violets, and a frame that was slender but elegant. The problem was his posture, always hunched, always cowering. I straightened my spine. I practiced walking without the shuffle of a victim. I raided the wardrobe, discarding the gaudy, attention-seeking pastels Julian favored for sharp, monochromatic blacks and silvers that matched the House of Draxos. If I was to be the villain's consort, I had to look the part. Kalen ignored me entirely, which was a blessing. The servants, however, whispered. They were used to Julian throwing tantrums, breaking dishes, and crying over Kalen's indifference. When I politely asked the head maid for a cup of bitter tea and thanked her, she looked as if she'd seen a ghost. On the morning of the solstice banquet, the carriage was inspected. I was sitting in the library, pretending to read a treatise on magical theory, when the doors slammed open. Kalen strode in, bringing the chill of the winter wind with him. He was dressed in ceremonial armor, black steel etched with silver runes, a cape of midnight fur draped over one shoulder. He looked like a god of war. He stopped in front of my chair. He didn't speak. He simply reached into his coat and pulled out a golden chalice, encrusted with rubies that pulsed with a faint, sickly light. He set it on the table between us. "The cursed chalice. You were right," Kalen said softly. "I usually am," I replied, not looking up from my book, though my hands were trembling slightly. "Did you destroy it?" "No. I fed it to the void." He leaned forward, bracing his hands on the arms of my chair, trapping me. His scent, wood smoke, blood, and cold rain, enveloped me. "You have changed, Julian. The magic signature is the same, the soul feels similar. But the mind is different. It is sharp. Survival sharpens us all, my lord." "Don't call me that," he murmured, his thumb grazing my jawline. The touch was electric, confusing. In the novel, Kalen never touched Julian without intent to harm. This was possessive. Tonight, you stand by my side. If Alaric makes a move, you anticipate it. If you fail, I will feed you to the shadows myself. I expect nothing less. The imperial palace was a monument to excess. Crystal chandeliers the size of houses, floors of gold-veined marble, and a sea of nobles dressed in enough silk to clothe a nation. When we entered, the room went silent. Usually, Julian Vane clung to Kalen's arm like a frightened child. Tonight, I walked a step behind him, head high, one hand resting lightly on his forearm. I wore a suit of deep charcoal velvet with silver embroidery that mimicked the thorns of a rose. I felt the eyes of the court dissecting me. "Look at the vain boy," a duchess whispered behind her fan. "He looks dignified. He looks dangerous," her companion corrected. Kalen seemed to enjoy the confusion. He guided me through the crowd, his grip on my arm firm, possessive. We approached the dais where the emperor sat, and beside him, the hero, Prince Alaric. Alaric was the epitome of the White Lotus archetype. Golden hair, blue eyes, radiating a holy aura that made my skin itch. In the novel, I had rooted for him. Now, seeing the smug calculation in his eyes as he looked at Kalen, I wanted to punch him. "Duke Draxos," Alaric greeted, his voice dripping with faux sweetness. "And, Julian, I didn't expect to see you. I heard you were taken ill. Rumors of my frailty are greatly exaggerated, Your Highness," I said smoothly, bowing just low enough to be respectful. but not low enough to be submissive. Alaric blinked. He had expected me to stutter. I see. Well, it is good you are here. We have a surprise for the court tonight. My stomach dropped. This wasn't in the book. The plot was changing because I had changed it. The butterfly effect. By removing the chalice, I had forced Alaric to improvise. A toast, Alaric announced, raising a glass. To the unity of the empire. And to the exposure of traitors. The doors to the banquet hall slammed shut. The guards lining the walls drew their swords. But they weren't imperial guards. They wore the blue and gold of Alaric's private faction. Kalen, I whispered, barely moving my lips. It's a coup. He's not waiting for the evidence. He's just going to kill you. I know. Kalen replied, his voice calm. Stay close. Duke Draxos. Alaric shouted, pointing a finger at us. You stand accused of conspiring with dark forces. Surrender, and your death will be swift. Kalen laughed. It was a dark, terrifying sound that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Shadows began to bleed from his boots, staining the gold floor ink black. You strike at the wolf with a wooden stick, little prince. Kill him, Alaric screamed. Chaos erupted. Spells flew across the room, explosions of fire and ice shattering the tables. The nobles screamed and scrambled for cover. Kalen was a blur of motion, his shadow magic forming whips and shields, decimating the guards that rushed him. I wasn't a fighter. I was a liability. I ducked under a flying table, my mind racing. Kalen was powerful, but he was outnumbered 50-1. Alaric had brought elite mage killers. I saw one of them, a rogue assassin cloaked in invisibility magic, flanking Kalen's left side. Kalen was busy deflecting a fireball from the right. He didn't see the blade coming. The novel's logic dictated that the villain dies when he is arrogant. Kalen was arrogant. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed a silver platter from the table, sprinting across the chaos. It was a stupid, clumsy plan, but it was all I had. As the assassin lunged, aiming a poisoned dagger at Kalen's exposed ribs, I threw myself between them. I slammed the heavy silver platter into the assassin's arm, deflecting the blow. But the assassin was fast. He reversed his grip and slashed upward. Pain, hot and searing, exploded across my chest. I gasped, falling back. The world tilted. Julian. The scream didn't sound like Kalen. It sounded human. Terrified. The shadows in the room surged, expanding outward with the force of a tidal wave. The assassin disintegrated, literally unraveled into nothingness by the sheer density of Kalen's rage. The guards were blasted back, pinned against the walls by tendrils of darkness. Kalen was there, catching me before I hit the ground. The great Duke, the blood tyrant, dropped to his knees in the middle of the battlefield, heedless of the magic flying over his head. You idiot, he hissed, his face pale, eyes wide. You absolute fool. Did I coughed, blood bubbling past my lips. Did I save the villain? Silence, he commanded, but his voice shook. He ripped off his glove, pressing his bare hand against the slash on my chest. Dark energy poured from him, not to hurt, but to stitch. You do not get to die. I own you, Julian. I have not given you permission to leave. The armory. I mumbled, my vision tunneling. North. Under the frozen lake. I don't care about the armory. Kalen roared, the sound cracking the marble floor beneath us. He looked up at Alaric, who was watching in horror as his coup fell apart under the weight of the Duke's unleashed power. Kalen's eyes were entirely black now. No whites, no irises. Just the void. You hurt what is mine, Kalen said to the prince. I didn't see what happened next, because the darkness took me. Waking up was slow and warm. I was in a bed that felt like a cloud. The scent of medicinal herbs and Kalen's wood smoke cologne filled the air. I opened my eyes. I was back in the ducal manor, in a room I didn't recognize. It was vast, dominated by dark wood and silver accents. Kalen's bedroom. I tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in my chest stopped me. Careful. Kalen was sitting in a wingback chair by the fire, reading a document. He looked exhausted. His hair was loose, and he wore only a white shirt, the top buttons undone. He looked domestic and incredibly dangerous. He set the paper aside and walked over to the bed. He sat on the edge, his weight dipping the mattress. You've been asleep for 4 days, he said. Did we win? I asked, my voice weak. We escaped. Alaric has declared war, but his legitimacy is shaken. The nobles saw his attempt to murder a guest. And he paused, his gaze dropping to the bandages on my chest. They saw the jealous outcast sacrifice himself for his betrothed. You are quite the hero of the tabloids, Julian. I prefer a strategic partner, I murmured. Kalen reached out, his fingers tracing the edge of the bandage. His touch was hesitant, almost reverent. Why did you do it? You possess no magic. You are frail. You should have run. If you died, I died, I said simply. Pragmatism. Liar. Kalen leaned in close, his face inches from mine. I have interrogated the shadows. They tell me fear. They tell me ambition. But in that moment, when you jumped, there was no calculation. Only instinct. He grabbed my chin, forcing me to look at him. You confuse me, Julian. For years, I wanted to wring your neck. Now, the thought of your silence terrifies me. Is that a confession, Duke Draxos? It is a warning, he whispered, his lips brushing against mine, a feather-like contact that sent a jolt of heat through my battered body. You have bound yourself to a monster. There is no going back to the light. You are the villain's consort now, in truth. I looked into those dangerous, captivating eyes. I thought of the boring, safe life I had left behind. I thought of the thrill of the banquet, the power of his magic, the complexity of the man beneath the monster. I reached up, threading my fingers through his long, silky hair, pulling him down until our foreheads rested together. I never liked the light anyway, I whispered. Kalen let out a low, victorious growl and crushed his mouth to mine. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was acclaiming. It tasted of blood, magic, and a desperate, starving hunger. I realized then that the original story was dead. The tragedy was over. We were going to write a new ending. And God help anyone who stood in our way. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Julian take control of his fate, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you save a villain who had tried to kill you just days before? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,